On a sunny and breezy day, I led my daughter to stroll leisurely on the bustling street. Suddenly, a little beggar came into view. My daughter, being soft-hearted by nature, upon seeing his pitiful appearance, tugged at my sleeve and stubbornly insisted that I give the child some money. Unable to resist her, I took out a 10-yuan note from my wallet, handed it over, and was about to turn and leave. At this moment, the little beggar curled the corner of his mouth, revealing a meaningful smile, and his pitch-black eyes stared intently at my daughter's face. He said, "You are extremely beautiful, just like a delicate toy. How much would it cost for me to buy you?" Recalling that early morning, Xiaoxian clamored to go to the amusement park opposite our home very early. I really couldn't decline, so I hurriedly put aside the work I was busy with at hand, grabbed my wallet and phone, and took her out. When passing by a quiet tree-lined path, Xiaoxian suddenly shook my arm vigorously, her voice soft and full of pity. "Mom, that little brother is so pitiful. Shall we give him some money?" I looked in the direction she pointed. Under the street lamp by the roadside, there leaned a ragged little boy, playing with a plastic toy that was so worn out that it was almost unrecognizable. Filled with compassion, I took out a 10-yuan note from my wallet and handed it to him, just about to turn and leave. The little boy threw away the plastic toy in his hand with a whoosh, stood up, and tightly clutched the 10-yuan note in his hand. His eyes rolled around a few times, and then he stared straight at my daughter's face, his tone filled with a strange sense of admiration. "Sister, you are really beautiful, just like a lovely doll. How much would it cost to buy you?" As soon as he said this, a strong sense of discomfort immediately welled up in my heart. I immediately stepped forward quickly, shielding my daughter tightly behind me, and my attitude instantly turned cold and stern as I shouted sharply, "Whose child is this? Isn't there anyone to take care of him?" I shouted several times, but there was no response from around, and no one came to claim the child. Seeing this, a gloomy smile suddenly appeared on the child's face, and he said, "Auntie, I'm a beggar. I have no parents." I carefully looked him over a few times. Although the child was dressed in tattered clothes, his face and fingernails were unusually clean. My heart skipped a beat, and I faintly suspected that this little beggar might be an accomplice of human traffickers. Immediately, I vigilantly held my daughter's hand tightly, just wanting to leave this troubled place quickly. Just as we were about to turn and leave, the boy's voice, with a somewhat strange smile, drifted over from behind. "Goodbye, Xiaoxian." Instantly, a chill ran down my spine, and I turned around abruptly, filled with shock in my heart. How could he know my daughter's name? When I got home and was helping my daughter take off her coat, I saw the name tag embroidered on the left shoulder of her coat. Only then did I suddenly realize that probably because I sewed name tags on each of her coats, the boy knew her name. Even so, I was still extremely worried. I put on a serious look and solemnly warned my daughter that she must never strike up a conversation with any stranger in the future, not even if the other party is a child. And she must not get close to that little boy. No matter what he gives or invites her to play, she must never agree. My daughter seemed to want to defend herself, but in the end, she nodded obediently. A few days later, a shocking incident occurred in our community. A child went missing. Amid the neighbors' chatter, I learned that the missing child was a 5-year-old little girl named Xiaochun. The child had been missing for several days. Her family had searched everywhere she usually went, but there was still no trace of her. Her grandmother was so anxious that she fainted at home. I was walking on the road, holding my daughter's hand in one hand and the newly bought groceries in the other, listening to the people around talking about this. I couldn't help but sigh that the world was really not peaceful recently. At this time, my daughter suddenly gently tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Mom, I actually saw Xiaochun." She told me that 2 days ago, she saw that boy give Xiaochun 10 yuan, and then lead Xiaochun somewhere unknown. At that time, Xiaochun also wanted to call her to go together, but she remembered my previous admonition and didn't dare to follow. I knew that Xiaochun's parents had died in a car accident last year, and usually she lived with her grandparents in room 101, building 5. The neighbors all knew that it was not easy for the old couple to take care of their little granddaughter, and they usually took good care of their family. Hearing this, I immediately pulled my daughter aside and asked her nervously, "Did that boy notice you?" My daughter was startled by my sudden action, and froze for several seconds. Then she shook her head and said timidly, "Probably not. I was hiding behind a big tree at that time." Just as I let out a sigh of relief and was about to admonish my daughter a few more words, Xiaochun's grandfather rushed over like a madman, grabbed my daughter and asked anxiously, "You saw Xiaochun, right? Where on earth did she go?" My daughter was so frightened by this sudden situation that she burst into tears with a wow. I quickly told Xiaochun's grandfather to call the police immediately, and then took my daughter to the police station to testify. However, that road was newly built, and the surveillance cameras had not been installed yet, so the clue was interrupted just like that. Just when everyone was at a loss, my daughter trembled and raised her children's smartwatch, her voice quivering. "Mom, I took a photo of that brother." The police acted very quickly, immediately, based on that somewhat blurred photo, and combined with the surveillance videos near the community. They found the little beggar that night. His name was Zhang Heng. Under the overpass, Zhang Heng was still playing with that worn-out plastic toy, facing the police's inquiries. His face was calm, and he firmly denied having abducted Xiaochun. Xiaochun's grandfather was so angry that his face turned red, and he swung his fist to hit Zhang Heng, but was stopped by the police in time. The police showed him those surveillance videos, and demanded sternly that he tell the truth. Seeing that he couldn't hide it anymore, Zhang Heng immediately put on a crying face and shouted, "Uncle, I'm a minor. You can't arrest me." In the interrogation room, Zhang Heng had tears all over his face, but his voice was surprisingly calm as he said, "I played a game with her. Later she cried, so I let her go." The police pointed at the figures of one tall and one short disappearing around the street corner in the surveillance video, and asked him harshly where he had taken Xiaochun and where Xiaochun was now. Zhang Heng, however, showed an extremely confused and innocent expression and asked in return, "Ah, didn't she go home? I don't know anything." Xiaochun's grandfather was so anxious that his eyes turned red. He rushed forward regardless, and pushed open the door of the interrogation room, trying to rush up and strangle Zhang Heng. Two policemen quickly stepped forward to stop him. The police asked Zhang Heng to honestly explain the detailed process of taking Xiaochun away, but his performance far exceeded the calmness that a person of his age should have. Every word seemed to be carefully thought out, and without any flaws. Watching this scene in the monitoring room, I felt a chill all over my body and was terrified. Zhang Heng claimed to be a homeless waif, having neither father nor mother, nor any friends. He candidly admitted that every time he beheld lively and lovely girls, a vehement impulse would well up within him, yearning to befriend them and engage in games together. Upon hearing this, the young police officer instinctively inquired, "Then why don't you play with little boys?" Zhang Heng extended a finger, gently wagging it in the air, and retorted with a tinge of disdain, "Boys are far too mischievous and unruly. They simply won't heed my words. Girls, on the other hand, are so docile and endearing, much like exquisitely crafted dolls." Consequently, day after day, he loitered and lingered outside our community. Once he encountered an adorable little girl, he would impatiently step forward to strike up a conversation. With a face full of helplessness, he lamented, "Today's parents are overly vigilant. They absolutely won't allow strangers to approach their children. I've long been tormented by my inability to find an opportunity." Until that day, when the wheels of fate finally turned, and he at last awaited the moment when Xiaochun was alone. Thus, with merely 10 yuan, Zhang Heng effortlessly led Xiaochun away from the spot. "Where did you take the little girl after luring her away?" In response to the police's query, Zhang Heng's lips curved slightly upward, revealing a somewhat profound smile, as if recollecting something extremely amusing. He slowly uttered, "Naturally, we went to play games. But that Xiaochun was anything but obedient. She kept crying non-stop, and it really annoyed me." First, he led Xiaochun to a nearby villa area, and played on the slide in the children's play area for a while. This brief period of play gradually eased Xiaochun's taut nerves, and her vigilance towards him also subsided. However, their good fortune did not last long, and soon they were driven out by the security guards. Undeterred, Zhang Heng then said to Xiaochun, "I know a place that's even more fun. Would you like to come with me?" Xiaochun, being naive and inexperienced, harbored no suspicion of his words, and followed him into the villa that had been sealed by the court from a blind spot in the surveillance. I told her to sit on the chair, stay still, and not make a sound, but she constantly wanted to shout. I found it really uninteresting, so I let her go. Zhang Heng commented with a look of disgust. In his mind, Xiaochun completely failed to meet his expectations of a doll. In his imagination, a doll should be quiet and obedient. After 4 consecutive hours of interrogation, the police achieved nothing. Zhang Heng consistently maintained that he merely wished to play games with the little girl, and had no intention of harming her. Acting on his description, the police ransacked the entire villa. In the end, aside from a solitary small red leather shoe, they found nothing. The forensic department was also unable to collect any blood evidence in the villa. The only certainty was that Xiaochun had indeed been to that villa. Due to insufficient evidence, and the fact that Zhang Heng was not yet 12 years old, in accordance with legal regulations, he was transferred to a juvenile detention center for temporary supervision. Xiaochun's grandfather, clutching his granddaughter's shoe, was overcome with grief at the police station entrance, weeping until he fainted. Subsequently, he was urgently rushed to the hospital for treatment. As I exited the police station, I overheard the police officer in charge of the case murmuring softly, "It's truly strange. We've scoured the entire area thoroughly, yet we haven't found even a trace of that little girl. The news of Xiaochun's disappearance spread like wildfire, and the entire community was instantly enveloped in a gloomy haze. The atmosphere became oppressive and eerie. The once lively and jubilant children's area, filled with laughter and chatter, was now desolate and devoid of any children. Time flew by and 48 hours passed in the blink of an eye. The police still hadn't found any evidence of Zhang Heng harming Xiaochun. Helplessly, they had to release him. Considering Zhang Heng was a homeless child, out of humanitarian concern, the neighborhood office placed him in a local orphanage, the Blue Sky Orphanage. Among the neighbors, there were many warm-hearted elders. Upon learning that Zhang Heng was the one who had taken Xiaochun, and that he lived in this orphanage, they were immediately filled with indignation. They swarmed around the orphanage entrance, demanding justice for Xiaochun's family. Xiaochun's grandfather in particular, held up a banner and sat at the orphanage entrance, weeping bitterly and crying out, "Hand over the murderer!" The situation quickly spiraled out of control, severely disrupting the normal lives of the other children in the orphanage. Soon, the police arrived to maintain order, and took the emotionally charged Xiaochun's grandfather away. A few days later, Xiaochun's grandfather suddenly came to the neighborhood office where I worked. I looked at the old man before me. His eye sockets were sunken, his face was haggard, and he was devoid of any vitality. The pain and suffering he had endured during this period were self-evident. The old man dejectedly stated, "The Criminal Investigation Department has officially closed the case and classified Xiaochun's case as a missing persons case. Since there is indeed no evidence of Zhang Heng's crime, nor any discernible motive, and given that he is under 12 years old and lacks criminal responsibility capacity, they can only, based on the actual situation, transfer the case to the Missing Persons Investigation Department." I stared in astonishment, my eyes wide open, and asked in bewilderment, "Clearly, Zhang Heng took the child, and we even found Xiaochun's shoe in the villa. How could the case be closed? Moreover, Zhang Heng obviously concealed a great deal. Why not continue the in-depth investigation?" The police explained helplessly, "This kind of case usually involves acquaintance-related crimes. But that child is an orphan, and has no grudges against your family. Perhaps he took Xiaochun on a whim. After Xiaochun left the villa area, she might have been taken away by someone else." As Xiaochun's grandfather spoke, he could no longer contain his inner grief and choked up, bursting into tears. Before leaving, he suddenly reached out and patted my shoulder. Staring at me intently with sharp eyes, he said meaningfully, "Xiaoxia, I heard that the child initially targeted your daughter." My hand, which was in the process of handing a tissue, froze instantly. I felt as if I had fallen into an ice cave, breaking out in a cold sweat. I hastily called my mother in a fluster, repeatedly exhorting her to keep a close eye on the child and absolutely not let the child out of her sight. After hanging up the phone, still worried, I dialed the phone number of Xiaoxuan's kindergarten teacher and earnestly admonished, "I'm on duty these days, and the child's grandmother will pick her up. Under no circumstances should you hand the child over to anyone else." At my workstation, I was restless, my heart filled with anxiety. It was not until my phone received a "safely home" notification from the phone watch that the heart that had been hanging all afternoon finally settled a little. On the way home from work, the more I thought about it, the more terrified I became. If Xiaoxian had followed Zhang Heng and the others that day, and then disappeared like Xiaochun, what would I do? I dared not continue thinking further, and merely felt a chill down my spine. In the evening, after my mother placed the dishes on the table, she informed me that Xiaoxuan's kindergarten was organizing a research activity tomorrow. There was a safety notice on the coffee table, asking me to remember to sign it. I inquired curiously, "Mom, did the teacher say where they're going for the research activity?" As I spoke, I walked towards the coffee table. "It's an orphanage. The children are going to be little volunteers there, hee." My mother's voice drifted from the kitchen. The moment I picked up that notice, my left eyelid twitched uncontrollably twice. As expected, the word "safety notice" for the little volunteer activity at the Blue Sky Orphanage came into view. My heart suddenly raced, and a sense of foreboding welled up in my heart. "No way!" I cried out in my heart, because Zhang Heng was currently in this Blue Sky Orphanage. I immediately took out my phone, and asked for a leave of absence for Xiaoxian on DingTalk. To avoid worrying my mother, I casually made up an excuse saying, "Tomorrow, we'll take Xiaoxian to the dentist. She won't be going to school." My gaze fell on the children's room, where Xiaoxian was playing merrily with her dolls. Her two small cheeks were as red as ripe apples, extremely adorable. I secretly vowed in my heart, "Daughter, Mom will definitely not let you suffer even the slightest harm." Early the next morning, my mother and I took Xiaoxian to the children's hospital. Just after the dental check-up, my unit suddenly called, saying that an urgent document required the key to the archives room. But the key had suddenly gone missing, and I happened to have a backup. I quickly hailed a ride-hailing car for my mother and Xiaoxian, asking my mother to immediately take the child home and not go anywhere. Before getting in the car, my daughter squeezed my hand tightly with her small hand and imitated my tone in a childish voice, saying, "Mom, remember not to wander around after work." Come home early. After delivering the key, I glanced at my watch. It was already 4:30. I thought to myself that my mother and Xiaoxian should have already arrived home. Just then my phone rang, and my mother's voice, anxious to the point of incoherence, came through the receiver. Xiaoran, something terrible has happened. Xiaoxian is missing. I was frantic with worry, and quickly checked the location of my daughter's phone watch, only to find that it was offline. Then I remembered that the watch had run out of power last night, and, since she wasn't going to school today, she hadn't worn it. I hurriedly parked the car, and saw my mother pacing anxiously at the community entrance, with several police officers standing beside her. Hello, are you Xiaoxian's mother? The police officer asked. I nodded in a fluster and immediately turned to question my mother. Mom, didn't I tell you to go home right away? How could Xiaoxian disappear? From my mother's intermittent account, I gradually pieced together the sequence of events. It turned out that upon arriving at the community entrance, Xiaoxian saw her kindergarten classmates crossing the road in groups, as they were about to set off for the research study destination. Seeing this, Xiaoxian clamored to go along. Her class teacher, upon noticing, suggested that she be allowed to join. After all, children of Xiaoxuan's age should participate more in group activities. My mother, convinced by this, didn't persist. After confirming the pick-up time with the teacher, my mother went home alone. However, when the activity ended and they were about to return to school, Xiaoxian was suddenly nowhere to be found. Only then did the teacher hastily call my mother. At this moment, everyone was still waiting for us at the orphanage. My police, and I rushed to the orphanage swiftly. I held Xiaoxuan's photo in my hand and asked everyone I met, have you seen this little girl? Her name is Xiaoxian. 1, 2, 3. All the children shook their heads in succession. Suddenly, I spotted Zhang Heng in the crowd. A surge of anger welled up in my heart instantly. I rushed towards him recklessly, grabbed his arm tightly and roared hysterically. Did you kidnap my daughter? Give Xiaoxian back to me quickly. Otherwise I'll never let you off. Zhang Heng cried and struggled vigorously, shouting loudly. Auntie, you're hurting me. I'm still a child. How can you intimidate a child? The police, seeing this, quickly stepped forward to pull me away, and took Zhang Heng out for a separate interrogation. Before long, they came in and shook their heads at me helplessly. I rushed out of the classroom in disbelief, pointed at Zhang Heng on the swing set, and shouted at the top of my voice. It must be him. He kidnapped my daughter. Please arrest him quickly. Hurry up. The police just kept shaking their heads at me, asking me to calm down. They took me to the monitoring room. The video clearly showed that Zhang Heng had no physical contact with Xiaoxian at all. Even in the surveillance video, Zhang Heng was always alone, and didn't exchange a single word with anyone. I still harbored doubts. Just then, I keenly noticed that Zhang Heng in the video showed a faint smile in a certain direction. And the place where his gaze landed was exactly the girl in a pink princess dress with pigtails, Xiaoxian. Jinjieja. The screen suddenly went dark, and the video came to an abrupt end. I almost went crazy, pointed at the now black screen, and questioned everyone. What's going on? The director of the orphanage hurriedly pushed the door open, looking extremely embarrassed, and quickly explained. Dear parent, I fully understand your anxious mood at this moment. I'm extremely sorry. This surveillance camera suddenly malfunctioned this afternoon. We just reported it, and are waiting for maintenance. On the night Xiaoxian disappeared, my ex-husband's family stormed into my house aggressively. The police arrived immediately, 3 or 4 of them. My ex-husband's mother suddenly went crazy, grabbed the collar of a young police officer, and shouted hoarsely, What are you all doing? You can't even find a child. Pay up. You must pay. Where is that little scoundrel who kidnapped my granddaughter? I'll kill him today. The young police officer was startled by this sudden action and shouted sternly, Stop shouting. I have the right to arrest you for interfering with law enforcement. At this time, an undercover senior police officer motioned for the young officers to step back a few steps and not entangle with them too much. Then he turned to me amiably and said, Ms. Xia, regarding the case of Xiaoxian's disappearance, our police will continue to investigate thoroughly. We came today mainly to ask whether you and your family have had any feuds with others recently. I shook my head resolutely, firmly denying this possibility. I've always been cold-natured and have few friends on weekdays, let alone have grudges against others. My ex-husband shouted beside me, Sir, we don't mean to cause trouble, but this matter has to be resolved. My lovely daughter is missing just like that. Your police should show some consideration to the family, right? My eyes were bloodshot, and I stared at them with extreme disappointment. My ex-husband's mother, seeing this, muttered, What are you looking at? My son is doing this for your own good. Finding a child takes time and money. At that moment, I was filled with disappointment, and a deep sense of powerlessness engulfed me completely like a surging tide. I could no longer suppress my emotions, couldn't help but scream, and then lost consciousness. When I woke up leisurely in the hospital, it was already the next day. My mother's eyes were red, just as she opened the porridge bowl. I couldn't wait to snatch it and wolf down the food. My mother choked and said, Child, eat slowly. Be sure to take good care of your body. My tone was calmly terrifying as I said firmly, Mom, I must find Xiaoxian. After being discharged from the hospital, I took a long leave from my unit and guarded the entrance of the orphanage every day, closely observing Zhang Heng's every move. I firmly believed that he must have taken my daughter. However, Zhang Heng's behavior was unusually calm. He ate and slept on time every day, and his life was as regular as a clock. During this period, whenever I had free time, I would rush to the police station. But there were so few clues about Xiaoxian that the case had no new progress. Gradually, the police officers in charge of the case began to perfunctorily deal with me. Miss Xia, we understand that you're extremely anxious. Once there's any news, we'll definitely inform you immediately, okay? I walked home in a daze. The moment I opened the unit door, I caught a glimpse of a black figure flashing by from the corner of my eye. This wasn't the first time. Several times, I seemed to have seen the same figure at the entrance of the orphanage. At first, I thought it was Xiaochun's grandfather. But after verifying with the property management, I learned that after Xiaochun disappeared, her grandparents rented out the house and returned to their hometown in the countryside. Since it wasn't him, who could this figure be? That day, as usual, I sat in the pavilion at the entrance of the orphanage, staring intently at Zhang Heng. Suddenly, I keenly sensed someone approaching quietly from behind. I turned around abruptly and was surprised to see Captain Li. He was the captain of the criminal investigation team, in charge of Xiaochun and my daughter's disappearance cases. Captain Li handed me a bottle of mineral water and said gently, "Both Lu Chun's and your daughter's disappearance cases are under my follow-up." I took the mineral water while replying with a bitter smile. "Sir, didn't you give up the investigation and classify the case as a missing persons case? But as a parent, I definitely can't give up. Only by continuing to pursue this can I feel like a mother." Captain Li squatted down beside me and said earnestly, "I'm sorry about the outcome of the case. We police have established procedures for handling cases. This morning, the police station received a call from the director of the orphanage, saying that your actions have seriously affected the normal order of the orphanage. Considering your actual situation, I decided to come and persuade you personally. You can't solve the problem by keeping watch like this. But don't lose heart. I'll try my best to help you." I knew in my heart that Captain Li might have come specifically to monitor me. They were worried that I would harm Zhang Heng. I looked at him warily and planned to leave first. Captain Li shouted at my back that Zhang Heng is indeed a bit suspicious. Hearing this, I immediately turned around, with a look of surprise on my face. "Captain Li, you believe me? I'm sure that child took my daughter. But no one is willing to listen to me. You'll help me, right?" As I spoke, my voice began to choke. Captain Li seemed at a loss and quickly spoke to soothe my emotions. "Well, I don't have absolute certainty either. I just have an intuition that this child is a bit off." As he spoke, he took out a piece of paper from his pocket and spread it out. The paper was filled with thick, strange stripes. It couldn't be called a normal painting at all. This was drawn by that child. I showed it to my colleagues in the criminal investigation department. They said that judging from this painting, Zhang Heng's psychological age is far beyond that of his peers, almost reaching the level of an adult. I knew very well that criminal investigation police are extremely professional, and the knowledge involved is extremely profound, covering psychology, biology, and the handling experience of various strange cases over the past decades. To be honest, if a criminal tries to lie in front of criminal investigation police, especially those experienced senior officers, the probability of being detected is almost 100%. I originally just wanted Zhang Heng to be interrogated again, but unfortunately, there was no substantial evidence, and the police couldn't arrest him casually. However, what Captain Li said next made me feel cold all over. These days I examined the past cases and found a case of a mass murder in the Xiangya villa 17 years ago. That family initially also lost a 5-year-old daughter. 3 days after reporting the case, the couple was found dead at home. Later, in the basement of the villa, we found the body of a young girl. After sample verification, it was determined to be their missing daughter. Strangely, it seemed that the family had more than one child. Judging from the family photo, there was also a boy. Captain Li's implication was that the appearance of that boy was almost identical to Zhang Heng's. Yet perhaps this was merely a coincidence. After all, 17 years had elapsed, and Zhang Heng appeared to be nothing more than a child of 7 or 8. "Miss Xia, please don't be hasty. I will definitely do my utmost to assist you." I tightly clutched Captain Li's phone, glaring at the indifferent face on the screen with gritted teeth. I was certain in my heart that there must be an inextricable connection between the boy in the photo and Zhang Heng. Taking advantage of the moment when Zhang Heng turned around to engage with the doorman, I surreptitiously took a picture of that group photo. My original plan was to confront Zhang Heng with this photo, hoping to throw him off balance, and thus extract the truth. However, Zhang Heng's reaction stunned me. He spread his hands on the table and said calmly, "Yes, I abducted your daughter. Call the police and arrest me." There was no surveillance installed in the reception room. "Auntie, if you never want to see your daughter again, then go ahead and call the police to arrest me." The smile on Zhang Heng's face grew even brighter. Xiaoxian is so obedient, much more so than Lu Chun. As I emerged from the reception room, Captain Li was standing quietly not far away, waiting for me. His figure was tall and straight, bathed in the afternoon sunlight, exuding an air of justice. Today, I specifically negotiated with the director to let you meet that child. Please don't disturb the normal life of the orphanage anymore in the future. I nodded absent-mindedly. Subsequently, he asked me some questions, and I casually fuyan la guoqiu. Xia Yun, didn't you talk about anything else with that child? Before parting, Captain Li asked casually. Ah no, I think maybe it wasn't him who took my daughter. Captain Li sighed helplessly and patted me on the shoulder saying, don't worry. I will definitely find your daughter as soon as possible. I shook my head and said, Captain Li, don't worry. I won't stake out at the orphanage anymore. Because there's no need. Today is the weekend. I woke up early, dressed in a set of dark long-sleeve clothes and long pants, put on a hat, a mask and sunglasses, and then went out. When I arrived at the entrance of the orphanage, I saw a large number of children queuing up neatly and filing out behind the volunteers. I secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Today, the orphanage and Qingxiu Lake Park are jointly hosting a camping activity. 120 children, along with 10 volunteers, will spend the night outdoors. Fortunately, I made it in time. As I quietly trailed behind them and arrived at Qingxiu Lake, I suddenly saw a familiar figure ahead, Captain Li. I quickly pulled down the brim of my hat, intending to blend in with the tourists and slip away quietly. But he still recognized me. Captain Li, what a coincidence. Are you also here to tour the lake? Captain Li smiled and said, today is my day off. I heard that Qingxiu Lake has beautiful scenery. I, a rough-hewn person, am also here to join in the fun and be arty for a while. Hey Xiaoxia, are you here to tour the lake too? I forced a smile and said, yes. It's spring, and I'm here to relax. Captain Li walked up to me and started chatting. His words were rambling and without a clear point, as if he was really just here to enjoy the scenery. I looked behind me and decided to get rid of him as soon as possible. So I said, Captain Li, I was in such a hurry this morning that I didn't have breakfast. I'll excuse myself first to have a bite. Oh okay, you'd better go then. It's not good for your health to be hungry. Captain Li still had that smiling look on his face. Then he added, by the way, the wind by the lake is strong, Xiaoxia. Don't get too close. It's dangerous. I knew there was more to his words, but at this moment, I was so anxious that I had no time to think carefully. If I delayed any longer, it would really be too late. I quickly walked halfway around Qingxiu Lake, confirmed that Captain Li wasn't following, and then quickly passed through a path and returned to the original place. As expected, I saw a slender figure secretly leaving the team. A cold smile curled up at the corner of my mouth, and I followed quietly. Zhang Heng hailed a taxi, and I immediately drove closely behind. The car headed towards a nearby villa area. I saw him skillfully avoid each surveillance blind spot and walk straight into the gate of a villa with a seal on it. I struggled to push aside the fence and got in. As soon as I entered, I was surprised to find that the layout here seemed familiar. It was actually the villa where we had found Xiaochun's shoe last time. He entered the house through the side door. I waited for a while and then followed in. What greeted my eyes was a bedroom. The furnishings and the bed in the room were covered with a thick layer of dust. I hid outside the door and saw Zhang Heng skillfully lift the carpet, pull up the copper ring on the wooden board, and then his whole body disappeared. It turned out that there was a hidden staircase below. With the faint light of my phone, I carefully walked down step by step. Only then did I discover that he had dug a tunnel under this bedroom, leading directly to the basement. The basement was spotlessly clean. In front of the magnificent dining table, there seemed to be several figures sitting. I summoned up my courage and approached to take a look. Xiaochun, face as her pale as paper, was huddled in a chair. She was wearing a beautiful lace-trimmed tutu, her eyes wide open, her two lips firmly glued together with 502 glue, and painted with pink lipstick. Her large eyes were filled with fear and helplessness. Beside her, there were several shabby dolls of similar size, and the heads of those dolls were all turned towards me. This eerie scene made me break out in a cold sweat. I bit my arm tightly, suppressing the nausea in my stomach and the fear in my heart, and continued to move forward. Just then my phone suddenly vibrated. I trembled and swiped open the screen. It was a message from Captain Li. Xiaoxia, I know where you are. Immediately stop all actions, and leave the matter to the police. We have fully investigated Zhang Heng's background. He is much more complicated than you think. Don't act rashly. We'll be there soon. Before I could think it through, suddenly, from the tightly closed door at the end of the space, there came faint whimpers and the voice of a man. She'll be good, little sister. Your eyes are the most beautiful I've ever seen. They will definitely become the most perfect work. Without hesitation, I picked up a baseball bat beside me and smashed open the door. However, there was no adult man in the room. I looked at Zhang Heng warily. Then, my eyes moved down and fixed on the operating table. Xiaoxian was tied up tightly on it, on the verge of death. When she saw me, the originally desolate and empty eyes in Xiaoxuan's eyes instantly lit up with hope, and tears welled up in her eyes. Mom, save me. It's so scary here. Save me. As soon as she finished speaking, she fainted due to exhaustion. Xiaoxian, Mom is here. Don't be afraid. I suppressed my sobs, checked her condition, and then raised the stick, glaring at Zhang Heng and shouting, Who on earth are you, you damned pervert? Zhang Heng, however, pointed at the wall unhurriedly, staring straight at me with cold eyes, and said, I've been waiting for you for a long time. I looked over in despair, and saw that an entire wall was covered with large and small family photos, and the content of those photos was actually all about me and my daughter. You're also looking forward to being made into a perfect mother by me, right? Zhang Heng trembled slightly with excitement, his voice tinged with a bloody aura, and his eyes greedily scanned my body. Go to hell, pervert. I was so angry that I suddenly raised the baseball bat and smashed it hard towards his face. With a clang sound, the moment the wooden stick left my hand, my body also fell heavily to the ground. Zhang Heng, stop. I tried my best to force myself to calm down, looked directly into his eyes and said, You've already stained your hands with too much innocent blood. If you don't stop, you'll die. The smile on Zhang Heng's face disappeared instantly, and he said viciously, What do you know? I'm creating the most perfect work of art in the world. All love will change as long as people are alive. Only death can keep love in its original and purest form forever. It was the same with my parents, and with my sister. They all stopped loving me. It doesn't matter. I'll get a complete family and love in my own way. I shook my head and said, The police already know. They'll be here soon. You can't hide this anymore. So what? Zhang Heng let out a dry laugh. Auntie, I'm only 8 years old. I don't need to go to jail. What a lunatic. I noticed you a long time ago. You definitely didn't realize that I sprayed a large amount of ether in the cellar. Ha ha. He covered his mouth and laughed for no reason. As he laughed, I felt weak all over. My legs went soft, my head was dizzy, my eyelids grew heavier and heavier, and my consciousness gradually blurred. Zhang Heng didn't search me. He seemed to be busy rummaging for some tools. Even when talking to me, he seemed absent-minded, almost devoting all his energy to rummaging through boxes and cabinets. At this moment, he suddenly raised something and grinned wickedly, saying, Next, I'm going to remove the unnecessary tissues from your body. It might hurt a bit. Endure it, auntie. My heart was pounding wildly in my chest. I thought to myself, is Zhang Heng going to turn me into a puppet exactly like Xiaochun right here? Just as the glistening tip of the knife was about to pierce the skin of my neck at this critical moment, suddenly, the sound of a sharp object piercing flesh, a poocher sound, rang in my ears. Jinjieja. A warm substance sprayed onto my face, and the sweet and fishy smell instantly permeated the narrow space. Zhang Heng, who had been so arrogant just a second ago, was now lying on the ground, gasping for breath with great difficulty. Is it you? Upon seeing the person, he was so drunk that he could barely speak. Grandpa Xiaochun was like a madman. He straddled Zhang Heng, one hand firmly gripping his neck, and the other hand holding a large and thick wrench, smashing it forcefully towards Zhang Heng's head. With each blow, Zhang Heng's limbs would twitch involuntarily until he completely ceased struggling. The air was filled with a nauseating stench of blood. My stomach was churning, but I didn't even have the strength to vomit. After the violent act ended, Grandpa Xiaochun threw away the blood-stained wrench, and slowly slid to the ground. His face was deathly pale, his lips were quivering slightly. He covered his eyes with his blood-stained hands, and tears gushed out from between his fingers, sobbing painfully. Xiaochun, my dear Xiaochun. I staggered to my feet, and hurriedly stepped forward to check Xiaoxuan's injuries. Fortunately, she hadn't been subjected to any abuse, just frightened into a faint. I took another look at Zhang Heng's body on the ground. His head was a bloody mess, a ghastly sight. Dark red blood flowed all over the ground, and he was undoubtedly dead. The anesthetic in my body gradually began to take effect. I struggled to hold on to the edge of the operating table, and said to Grandpa Xiaochun, Uncle, the police are coming soon. Grandpa Xiaochun stopped crying, and looked at me silently, his lips moving twice. My head was buzzing. Before I could hear clearly, I fell heavily to the ground and completely lost consciousness. A few days later, I woke up slowly in the hospital, continuously shouting my daughter's name. Captain Lee? Why are you here? Where is my daughter? Where is she? I was so excited that I wanted to get out of bed, but suddenly found that my right wrist was handcuffed to the hospital bed. Captain Lee stood in front of the bed, looking at me quietly and said, Your daughter is fine. She was just a bit frightened. Now your mother is taking care of her. Learning that my daughter was safe, the huge stone in my heart finally fell. At this time, Captain Lee suddenly said out of the blue, Zhang Heng suffered from severe mental illness and pituitary hormone disorder. He then explained that this disease, also known as pituitary dwarfism, was mainly caused by lesions in the anterior pituitary gland, or the hypothalamus. Due to insufficient secretion of growth hormone, it led to short stature. He was actually a 24-year-old adult, but his appearance resembled that of an 8-year-old child, which was the reason for his disguised identity. As for the mental illness, it was because he was abandoned by his biological parents in his childhood, and later found out that he had this disease, and was then rejected by his adoptive parents. All these misfortunes caused his inner world to be extremely distorted, longing for family love and social attention. He targeted me, merely because a few months ago, I helped him drive away 2 stray dogs. Since then, he became interested in me and Xiaoxian, started following us, frequently moving around near our residence, looking for an opportunity to strike. The burglary case in that villa 17 years ago was also his doing, Captain Lee said, looking at me. Originally, he planned to turn his adoptive parents and sister into puppets, but for some reason, he changed his mind temporarily and faked the scene as a burglary-related murder. He was very clever. He knew to take away all the clues related to him at the scene. If it weren't for finding that group photo in the little girl's pocket, we wouldn't have discovered this crucial clue. The day you followed him, my investigation order was officially approved. My colleague compared the hair of Zhang Heng in the orphanage with the residual blood at the scene, and confirmed that he was the murderer, Zhang Heng, in the homicide case 17 years ago. I wanted to stop you, but unfortunately, it was a step too late. Now can you tell me what happened? Captain Lee opened a black notebook and, holding a ballpoint pen, said calmly. I looked at him. My throat felt blocked as if by something painful and stinging. After a long pause, I finally spoke, my voice tinged with bitterness. A few days ago, I noticed someone following me all the time. Later, I found out that it was Grandpa Xiaochun. In fact, he never went back to his hometown. Just like me, he firmly believed that Zhang Heng had taken the child. So we discussed and decided to work together. I would be the bait to lure Zhang Heng out. Captain Lee's hand paused slightly and he asked, and then you killed him? My fingers rubbed back and forth on the bedsheet, and I denied it anxiously. No, I didn't kill anyone. So, was it Lu Binghui who killed him? Lu Binghui was Grandpa Xiaochun. My expression changed drastically. I involuntarily clenched my lips, and my slightly trembling hands turned ice cold. Captain Lee, how long will the sentence be for manslaughter by negligence? A look of understanding flashed across Captain Lee's face, and he said in a deep voice, giving false testimony will be held criminally accountable. At this moment, a policewoman walked in at the door and whispered a few words in Captain Lee's ear. His complexion changed drastically. He stared at me on the hospital bed and sighed, saying, Lu Binghui committed suicide. Grandpa Xiaochun's death completely brought this bloody farce to an end. It was said that he confessed to his crime without reservation, and also asked the police to be sure to hand a letter to me. He left a bank book, which contained the life savings of the old couple, and the money from selling the house. Grandpa Xiaochun asked me to handle his funeral affairs, and put his ashes together with Xiaochun's. The letter also said that Grandma Xiaochun in the countryside also asked me to take care of her. The end of this letter roughly went like this. Hatred and killing cannot end a tragedy. Instead, they are precisely the beginning of another tragedy. He knew that a mentally ill person who committed murder would not be sentenced. But as a grandfather who had lost his beloved granddaughter, he must pay the price of love. This was his destiny. There was no need for social and moral constraints or criticism. After being discharged from the hospital, I handed the bank book and their ashes to Grandma Xiaochun, and often took Xiaoxian to visit her in the countryside. When I saw her crying heart-rendingly, I truly understood why Grandpa Xiaochun had been so resolute. Even after a long time, my mother still couldn't help murmuring. If I hadn't been kind-hearted enough to help Zhang Heng drive away those stray dogs, and hadn't been this good Samaritan, such a terrible thing wouldn't have happened. However, I shook my head and disagreed with her. Mom, all kinds of accidents happen in this society every day. When we are in trouble, we also hope that someone will lend a helping hand. Having compassion is not a sin. By observing one person, one can glimpse the world. In this long journey of life, as we pass through the branches and leaves, it is precisely because great love connects people's hearts that we can walk on thorns without feeling pain and shed tears without feeling sad. Because there is love in our hearts, we are fearless of distance. I think in the future, I will also teach my daughter in this way.